Hello and welcome to this mini course on spiritual practices. I am Jackie Trotman. I'm going to be your guide to guide you through these practices. And these are how we engage with our relationship with God, to have greater peace, guidance, and to experience God's presence in a deeper way. We live in a material world, and our personal relationships, we engage with others through text and phone calls and emails and spending time with people. And it would be great if we could text or call God and God would call or text us in return. But God doesn't work that way. And like any relationship, it requires two-way communication. And we communicate with God through these spiritual practices. If you want to play the piano, you have to practice. If you don't practice, you won't get any better. And it's not to play the piano about performance, but for the sheer joy of making beautiful music that you can create. And these practices are not about performance. Unfortunately, daily devotions can become just another thing to do on the to-do list, another thing to perform when we already feel like we can't get enough done. They can become hollow or rushed, and this can make us feeling guilty or even disconnected from God. What these spiritual practices will do is to steep yourself in God's presence. My mother was British and she loved her tea. She would have at least 3 cups a day, and she liked her tea strong. She left those tea bags in to steep for a long time. And I love this message version of Luke chapter 12, verses 29 through 32. It was when Jesus was saying not to worry about tomorrow. And he says, what I'm trying to do here is to get you to relax, to not be preoccupied with getting, so you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way He works fuss over these things, but you know both God and how He works. Steep yourself in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. You will find your everyday human concerns will be met. Don't be afraid of missing out. You're my dearest friends. The Father wants to give you the very kingdom itself. And the Apostle Paul said, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. To pray without ceasing seems quite impossible. But you can begin to understand how you can actually do this by being connected to God through these spiritual practices. And when you do, the fruits of the Spirit will start to manifest in your life. You embody the fruits of the Spirit. And the practices provide the means to live in the world, but not of the world. A world that calls us to be busy and to stress and strive and to be fearful and anxious, and that what we do is never enough. These practices connect our hearts and our minds to God. So by being faithful in these practices, they provide us with an awareness of God's presence. These practices help transform our anxiety into peace, our doubts into confidence, our fears into courage, and our self-condemnation into self-acceptance and self-love. And that happens by steeping ourselves in God's loving presence. Let me introduce you to our first practice.